The Working Artist Project is brought to you by Second Line Arts Collective. Learn how you can support at secondlinearts.org.
We're creating a platform for those who are curious, one that tells the story from the artist's perspective. Moments in time, captured from the innovators who are reshaping dance, music, theater, and the visual arts. This is the Working Artist Project.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Working Artist Project. My name is Darian Douglas.
Hey, good evening. My name is Gregory Ajid.
Yeah, today we have a very special guest all the way from Nice. Is it Nice or is it Nice, Greg? Nice, France.
No, you cannot call it Nice, France. It's Darian Douglas. my mom and dad are rolling their eyes right now.
That's right. If y'all don't know, Greg is actually of French descent. You know, I don't really know French words, but you know.
Well, you know, it's actually kind of funny because my grandpa grew up in Nice, so once or twice growing up, I was able to visit, and that is a beautiful, beautiful part of the world. And if anyone has an opportunity to check out the French Riviera or Nice, please take it. Hey. It'll be good for you.
Yeah, man. I love France, man. I love France. France is, I love the food, you know, the food. When I was single, I loved some other things, but now I just love the food, you know. And why don't we get right into it, man?
Darian Douglas on fire already. In the morning, you're already working for it. But check it out. So this morning we have a very special guest. This guy is really taking over the internet and leading a new wave of saxophone education, music education, content online. And we're very pleased to have the founder of BetterSax.com, Mr. Jay Metcalf, joining us. Jay, how you doing today?
Hey, what's up, Greg? What's up, Darian?
What's going on, man?
I'm good. Thanks for inviting me.
We're both very honored to have you here, and thank you so much for making the time to join us and share your story and your experiences with us.
It's my pleasure. It's my great pleasure.
So maybe we can just jump right in and just get into it. So Jay, you're originally from New York.
That's right.
And I just kind of, you know, you've currently, you know, if you were to type in bettersax.com or you type in your name on Google, you pop up with this YouTube channel and social media following of millions of people and just a worldwide reach, and you've reached saxophone celebrity status these days. And so maybe, you know, I really wanted to spend some time breaking down how you got to this point and what drives you to create all this content for the next generation of saxophone players. So maybe when's the first time you heard the saxophone, and what yeah, like what's your first memory with
from the beginning?
And what inspired you to be the Better Sax man?
Well, yeah, I mean, you make it sound like I had it all planned out from, you know, what you just said, like the following and the people that watch me. It's all kind of virtual. I mean, it's only when I go to NAMM or like these conferences and everybody recognizes me that it becomes a reality for me, because it's just, you know, it's just like view counts on YouTube, you know what I mean? From my perspective. So it's still when you say things like that, it still like kind of blows my mind, you know, like a saxophone celebrity status. I don't think about it in those terms. Yeah, so the first time I heard the saxophone like live in front of me that I remember is when I was 10, I think, and they were demonstrating the instruments for the band. You know, they're like recruiting band members at an assembly at school, you know. Did you have one of those?
Oh, absolutely.
Actually, I remember the clarinet players played Pink Panther, and I was sold.
Well, okay, I wanted to play the trumpet, okay? I wanted to play the trumpet. I went home, said, Mom, Dad, I want, you know, the assembly band. I can join band. I want trumpet. And my older brother had already played the saxophone, and he had already switched to the baritone saxophone. He was 3 years older than me. And we still had an alto So like, well, guess what? We got an alto, so that's what you're playing, And that's, so now I'm glad that that worked out that way. And also my father had played trumpet, and he says, you don't want to play trumpet. He said, you don't want to play trumpet. You should play saxophone. It's a better choice. So there it is.
That's love right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So growing up, did you partake in the band programs and things like that in elementary, middle? And
Absolutely. That was a big part of, that was like, for me, the thing that made school kind of worth going to, you know what I mean? And that's what I looked forward to every day at school. And yeah, I mean, I would say I took it pretty seriously. I kind of devoted all of my energy into that, and not so much my other studies, but I did put a significant time into, every extra bit of time I had, I would go to the band room and practice and hang out and just kind of do that thing, and I'm glad I had that opportunity.
Yeah, man, that's dope, man. So you're coming up in New York, you're going through the band program, and then what happens next, man? What happens after that? Like, are you
okay? Yeah. What happened? So at some point, you're at school and they say to you, you're like a junior or something, and you have to decide about going to college, right? You're going to go to college. What are you going to major in, right? And you have to tell your advisor this, And I remember I had that meeting, and a few minutes before that meeting, I was like, what am I going to major in? I said, how about music? And it was like that. And it was that just, spur of the moment decision. And I decided to major in music. So they're like, okay, well, here's the state music schools in New York that you can apply to. And I applied to them, and I auditioned, and then I went and I majored in music. I went to SUNY Potsdam, which has the Crane School of Music, upstate New York. And so I did 4 years of the full on music study thing. And then, once you start going down that road, you're in, what I mean? You're in.
Absolutely.
Omnibook, 2/5, scales and thirds.
Yeah. All that stuff.
All that good stuff.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Cause it's funny, Potsdam, I had a girlfriend that moved to Potsdam from New Orleans. So that's like the only reason I have that city, that town in my consciousnly. And it's funny that you actually coincidentally went there. Cause it's a tiny, tiny town. Like
You've been there.
I haven't been there, but I've heard a lot about it. But what was it like studying music out there? Like, you kind of, aren't you just like a few minutes away from the Canadian border?
Yeah. And it's like Arctic up there. It's in this climatic zone where it's climatic zone where it's so cold, but it's so cold. It's like even colder than when you go to Montreal is cold, but I'm sure Potsdam is even colder. So it just snows. It snows. You start school in September, and second week of school you're covered in snow. It's like that sort of thing, And then the snow doesn't melt until May, until the week before you go home. It's like that. Wow. So you don't have there's a lot of the stuff that people normally do at college, the partying and everything, but there's also you don't have you're just stuck inside. So you practice. If you're good, if you're a good student, you practice.
Man, what was it like living in that situation? Because I'm from Mississippi originally, so I went to college there, and I'm curious if you had to create situations to play. If you're in the middle of nowhere with no clubs and stuff like that, how did you kind of?
Yeah. Well, we had jam sessions at school all the time. As far as situations to play live. Bars, just it was hard to play live music in the bars without being 21, so there's that whole thing. Not that we never went to the bars, but it was, it was like this awkward thing. And then, and we did a lot of playing situations. We did have to create situations do classes, do workshops for like local schools and in the region and do stuff like that. And we did get some support like that. But yeah, it wasn't like growing up in a populous place where there's lots of opportunity to play live for sure.
Yeah, because I'm just curious if that in that vibe transferred into your content creation. Where you're just like, all right, I gotta create something outside of the norm. You know what I mean?
Interesting. I never actually thought of it that way. I think, well, that's interesting. Maybe we'll figure out how, maybe by talking this through, we'll figure it out. So in my last year at college, I got this letter, or I guess my junior year, I got this letter where I was invited to apply to the study abroad program. And this really turned me on. I was like, wow, this is really cool. I'd love to go to another country. I've never been to another country, So I filled out my application, and I had choices between my two choices were England and Sweden. And the place in Sweden was even more remote than Potsdam, New York. So I was like, well, I don't want to go to Sweden because that's just the same thing, So I went to study in Birmingham, England. And Birmingham's a big city, an industrial city. It's kind of maybe the Detroit or something of England. One of those sort of places. So I went there, and while I was there, I started traveling around Europe, and I went to I just started going to different countries because it was so easy with these trains and everything. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up in France by accident, totally by accident. I had actually, on one of my trips, I had met a guy in a hostel. And he just came up to me and started talking to me. He saw me by myself, and I guess I looked lonely, and he came up to me and he started talking to me. I remember his name was Bill, and he was from somewhere in Canada. And Bill said to me, "You need to go to Nice." No, I swear, 100% the truth. And I said, okay, I didn't even know. I knew I had heard of Nice because I had taken French in high school. I was the worst student in my French class, by the way. And so I'd heard of Nice because we used to have to use it in sentences, but that's all I knew about Nice. And I made my way to Paris at some point. And I was in Paris, and it was the winter, and it was miserable and cold. And I wasn't happy. So I said, I thought of Bill, and I said, Nice. Okay. So I went to the train station, and I said, I'd like a ticket to go to Nice. And they said, no. That's just something they say in France a lot, No. They like this. And you're at the wrong train station. You can't possibly go to Nice from here, you fool, So I had to go across town, get to the other train station, get my ticket, and then just got on this train. And this was 1996. Okay, so this is a long time ago. Yeah. And this was before the fast trains, So it was like eternity. I was on this train for an eternity, and I had no idea how long it would be, because there was, the information. It was kind of before our information age, And I finally got to Nice, and I got off the train, and it was night. It's nighttime. I got off the train, and it's palm trees, and it's warm. It's December, but it's warm. And it's palm trees, and I just kind of fell in love with this place right away. And I very quickly met these musicians and started playing music. And started playing music on the streets and in bars, and I was having a time of my life. And I had one semester to finish at college. And I called up my mom, and I was like, Mom, I'm staying here. I'm in the south of France, by the way. I'm not coming back.
It's gonna be every phone call that someone's mother's dreading to have.
Yeah, I think I was 21. It's 21 years old, But I'm still a kid, And my mother was she didn't take me seriously. She's like, no, you'll be coming home, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to let you know, So, yeah. And then, so that kind of started this love affair with the south of France and Nice. And then I did go back. I did finish school, but I kept coming back to the south of France because I would come here and it was just music. I would just play music. I didn't when I was in New York after college, I was teaching. I was playing gigs. I was repairing saxophones. So I was kind of doing the things that freelance musicians do to make ends meet. You kind of try to get as many gigs as you can, right?
Right.
So you're just constantly working and hustling and trying to get, move things up to the next level, little by little. I mean, that's the way it works for most of us. But when I would come here, there was none of that. It was just like, yeah, you could just play music and have fun. And it wasn't like it wasn't this struggle, that I felt like I always had to struggle in music at home. And besides that, there was all the other benefits, so like the beautiful food and just the place and just the vibe and the the exoticness of it all. And yeah, so I just dug it, and learning new languages and meeting people that were from just the diversity of people that I was meeting and playing with. And it was like intoxicating. And when I would go back to the States, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. So this went on for a while. And during that time, I didn't just live in Nice. I lived in Paris. I even lived in Copenhagen for a while. And I traveled extensively with street bands playing music. What we would do is we would, it sounds like impossible nowadays. Okay. But this is what we would do. We would rent a car. And I guess it just didn't cost that much back then. We'd rent a car like for an open-ended trip. And we'd get in the car and we'd start in Nice and we did this in the summers because in the summer it gets kind of hot here. And it was nice and it was lots of tourists. But in the other Northern Europe, it's more mild. And so what we would do is we'd drive, and first we'd go to Italy and we'd play in some places in Italy on the streets. And then we would make our way up. And this was also before Euro. So everywhere we went, it was different money, so we just have we'd all have like a, our instrument case or whatever, just like all these different currencies, they were saving up. And then we'd go to Switzerland. And in Switzerland, we'd stay in this hostel. And this stuff cost nothing back then. I can't remember what it was, but it cost nothing. And we would busk in Switzerland, and they'd paid us in the Swiss francs, which were like double. It was like everything was just double the money you got, And then when we got tired of Switzerland, we'd go to Germany, and we'd go through Germany, and same thing, stop in all these places. And then we'd eventually make it to Denmark and do the same thing. And one summer we went all the way up to Oslo in Norway with this rented car, went all the way up. And then, because there'd be like four of us in the band and we just share the expenses of the hotel, we'd all be like sharing hotel rooms and stuff,
Yeah.
And then we'd work our way back, after a couple of months. And so that was a very rich experience for me. And I don't know how that relates to what I do now. I guess I live here now. But yeah, I think a lot of that experience kind of influences the way I teach, though, because it has nothing to do with what I learned in school. You know what I mean? That whole, like I basically had to relearn music all over again. Absolutely. When I started doing this, because everything I learned in school was like, wow, actually it didn't apply to impromptu daily performances for a different, group of people from different cultures every day. And, everything done by ear and by, with musicians, like, we teach each other songs, on the spot. And, it was just it's just a different way of learning music than in school where, things are written down, things are so organized and, so it was improvised in so many ways. And in my courses, that's kind of something I really stress is learn music the same way we learn languages and just, with your ears, listen mm-hmm. and communicate with other people. That's first, learn how to do that. The other stuff, reading music and what you learn in school is great. But so many musicians, I think, myself included, start out with just that view of it. And that's like missing, that's just missing the whole picture, you know, for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's actually I'm completely amazed to hear that story of you traveling through Europe and busking and things like that, because I think what really something that I really love about doing this and talking to different musicians is like hearing stories like that. Like, you know, seeing you online, you appear to, I mean, you're extremely polished, you're well presented, you're very well spoken. Your presentation of the material is really like on the highest level possible. And so then like I'm picturing you in your 20s in a bus or in a car with four of your friends just
Check it out, man. No, but let me complete the picture for you, because that stuff, that was very polished too, because what we did, we all wore suits. And
No
we
way.
we all wore suits, and it might have gotten, you know, so we'd be wearing those suits all the time. So when we would arrive somewhere in our car, you know, at the time it was all about, you had to try to maximize our earning potential, you know. So when we arrived somewhere and it was good weather and it was like lunchtime when people are outside eating outside at the cafe terraces, sometimes we would literally jump out of the car, get our instruments, and just start doing a show with our suits on, you know, and it was always like whenever you arrived in a new town, like for the first day or two is when you'd make the most money. And after you've been there for a while, everyone's kind of seen you, you know, so then like, they're not dropping as much. So the part of the benefit of like moving around so much is everywhere you went, like no one had ever seen the act before, you know, and so it really worked. And if you overstayed your welcome, you know, you would make less money. But yeah, we tried to have like a somewhat polished. I mean, maybe I don't know how polished it was, but we tried to at least give the appearance that we were, you know, because, you know, looks, people, I've always said, you know, people hear with their eyes often, you know, the tip of the average audience member is first making a judgment with their eyes.
Absolutely.
So you want to win them over with the look first, if you can. And then you want to win them over with the show, with the music, with whatever you're doing to another level. And then you ask for the money. But you know, it's all about kind of winning people over. And you know, so lessons like that do get applied to my YouTube and all my content creation. I try to make things visually, you know, appealing. I try to make the video content move quickly, because it's all about winning people. And today, people's attention span is so much less. You really have to win people over with your titles and thumbnails of videos and, you know, your Instagram. When you're making an Instagram post, you know, people make these long Instagram posts. Most people only watch them the first 10 seconds, if you're lucky. So make those first 10 seconds really count. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I wonder, like, when you started getting into like heavy content creation on YouTube, like, were you cognizant of like, I need to start a cult? Because I've been thinking about this whole cult, especially what's happening in America now. But it seems to me that every successful content creator, politician, what they do is they start cults. Musicians, anybody, you know what I mean? Like, and you have these supporters that believe in you. You see them on Twitch, you see them on CNN, you see them everywhere. Were you cognizant of that?
I mean, I don't think of it. I've never really thought of it in terms of that. And I mean, I don't think I have a cult. I think I have people that maybe like watching my videos.
Yeah,
And
cult might not be the right word.
No, man. I disagree with both of you, and I will be willing to bet $1 billion that you have a cult, just the same way that everyone else, like Wynton Marsalis, has a cult, whether he wants to admit it or not, and you do too.
well, perhaps it's not something that's really crossed my mind before, though. So, and I haven't thought about that, but it is, you know, with my content, I try to be myself. and I have a lot of respect for the people who I'm making content for. So I'm honest with them, and I get so much positive feedback from people through comments and through emails, and that I just try to live up to that, for people the best I can. And I really enjoy what I'm doing. So it becomes, I won't say easy because it's a tremendous amount of work, but I'm always motivated to keep going.
Yeah, I was like digging into your YouTube the last couple of days, so I saw like maybe the first videos that you had posted were about 4 years old, and so I was wondering, like, so what kind of drove you or inspired you to start getting on social media and to brand yourself as Better Sax, and again, like, start the game of content creation, of doing the Instagram, social media, making online lessons and courses and things like that. What motivated you to begin that? Or
Well, okay, so the all the online content was made because I had this idea for a course. I was in this band that was doing a lot of traveling, and all we did was travel and just all over the world. And we were constantly traveling. And when you're on your touring and you're with the guys in the band, you become very close, and you're just with each other all the time, and you just sharing rooms and eating all your meals together, or you're in a car. And I was always like the driver, So I remember, and we did this one gig where we did this gig, and we were in the Bahamas. We're at the Bahamas in this resort for like a week or something, and we had this other guitar player with us, who was a friend of the bass player, and he was just spending this week with us, but he had developed this online course and online platform where he's selling his courses, and he told me about it, and I was like, wow, that's amazing, that sounds like something I could do. And so it took me several years, but I finally developed this course. And the original course was my pentatonic foundation course, which is basically just a way to get people started going in this new direction of like, well, if you're just using your ears and you want to play, popular music styles, without getting into like heavy jazz or heavy, complex things, with pentatonic scales and stuff, you can really play a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And you could at least get started using your ear and taking music you hear on the radio or stuff you've already listened to growing up, turning it into music on your instrument. So I had this idea, and I developed that course. And then I was like, well, I have this course and I want to tell people about it. How do I tell people about it? And that's when I started a YouTube channel.
That's crazy, because it's funny. Like, even we're in today is November 23rd, 2020, and so it's funny to look back and reflect on what YouTube was 2, 3, much less 4 or 5 years ago, and YouTube is nothing like what it is today back then. And so what was the experience of like navigating this new frontier of video and connecting with people? Like, how were you getting immediate responses? Was it a thing that maybe you just kind of kept hacking away at and expecting, maybe if I make 100 videos, I'll have some followers? Or how was the experience at the beginning?
Yeah, I had no expectations really, because I knew nothing about YouTube actually. I had watched this was like 4 years ago or so, and as you said, and I had watched YouTube videos, but I had no expectations. I didn't know what a YouTuber was. I don't even think I knew of that term. So I had no expectations, and I just started making some videos. And in my first video, you didn't even see my face. I was just making like slideshow videos, you know? And I don't know how, I really don't know what happened. Everyone's always asking me like, oh, how do you make YouTube work? And I'm like, you know, I don't know. I mean, maybe you got to get lucky. I don't know. It was not like I thought this was going to work. I really had no expectations. I just started doing it. And as it works, you take things to the next level. And so, yeah, what I've tried to do is basically make every video better than the last video somehow, which gets harder and harder as you go, you know. But I get to this point where like, oh, that last, you know, my last videos were really, you know, I put so much into it. I can't go back to making slideshow videos, you know. So it has to, you set a standard and then you have to stick with it. So, but that can kind of get away from me too, because then I started like spending 3 days on a video. I'm like, well, this is unsustainable, you know, unless I only make one video every couple of weeks, you know, it's just unsustainable. So finding a balance, you know, and then you got to do your Instagram. It's still very much a work in progress. And as you said, YouTube has changed a lot. It's constantly changing. So it's like it's kind of an organic thing where you're just, you know, you're just reacting and to the response you get, to how your videos perform, and constantly going with it, always with the kind of having the assumption in the back of my mind, you know, one day YouTube could just disappear and it doesn't even exist anymore. So I try not to base everything on that either.
Man, as things, you know, in the world change and technology plays a more important role in all of our lives, like how can young musicians listening to this coming up attain some of the skills necessary to do things like video editing and sound editing and things like that, or even just filming a video?
Yeah, so check it out. I knew none of this stuff. I knew zero. Well, I mean, zero. Everything I knew, I had learned myself. So when I was making my first YouTube videos, I was using Keynote on my Mac. You ever use Keynote?
I never.
Because it's a slideshow. It comes in your Mac. If you have a Mac, you have Keynote. And it's like a slideshow thing for making presentations. So I started using that. And I never used the program before. I just learned. And if I ever didn't know how to do something, I went on YouTube. How do I do this? You know? And then I was like, oh, I have no idea how to make videos for YouTube. So I go on YouTube. How do I make a YouTube video? You know? And there was just everything I learned how to do, I learned by watching other people demonstrate it, you know, usually in YouTube videos, and, you know, by just kind of figuring it out. And that's, you know, when you kind of go down that route, you realize, wow, there's a whole world of people using YouTube to learn how to do something. And you also see how they use the platform to, like, you know, like what I do is I try to give out a lot of quality, valuable information to people with the hopes that a small percentage of them will enjoy that content enough that they're going to want to continue studying with me, buy one of my courses. I'm perfectly happy that the vast majority of people are just going to enjoy that video, get something out of it, and never buy anything. But that's kind of how it's supposed to work. And if, you know, people send me a nice comment or click the like button, whatever, that's great. And I kind of learned that process through using YouTube to learn other processes, you know.
Absolutely.
I'm so relieved to hear that. Sorry, because I feel like that's like a lot of what Darian and I have been doing over the last couple of years in creating this nonprofit and kind of navigating the world. And I really, you know, not only does YouTube provide amazing cat videos, but it is actually, you know, this unbelievable educational resource that you can, you know, in 2020, you can type in anything and you can essentially educate yourself on becoming, you know, from mixing in Logic to, you know, philosophy to anything, you know.
Absolutely.
To saxophone.
Absolutely. And it's, and, you know, I do remember in the beginning, there was like this kind of concept like, oh, you can't teach music online. You know, that's that's not something that needs to be done in person. And for someone who's always taught music in person, I was like, does this work? Does this work? Are people going to get real value from this, or do they need to have a one-on-one teacher? And then, and then I realized from the people getting in touch with me, so many people telling me, wow, this is great. Cause I don't have a saxophone teacher anywhere around where I live. Or I've been taking saxophone lessons from somebody, but I really didn't enjoy it. And I gave up, and now I found your videos, and now I'm back into it. So it's just constantly, like daily, I get multiple messages like that. So I'm like, okay, so it does work. And I also get all the messages from people saying, wow, I've learned so much. People saying to me, man, I went to school for this, or I took lessons for all these years, and in 2 days I learned more from your course than I learned in all that time. And so it does work, certainly for a lot of people. And in my own personal experience, I have also been taking other people's music courses and stuff, because how are you going to, you got to check out what other people are doing to better what you're doing. And I have, and through that, I've learned from people in online master classes and things, or on different instruments, when I want to play, when I want to get better, like, piano or something, I can go in, and I'm learning really well from the online thing. So it does work. So I remember that was a thing, and I didn't want to be like, telling people don't take live lessons, because I do think it's important to still have one-on-one contact. And this was all before our current situation with the pandemic, which has changed everything. And a lot of people always say to me, like, wow, it's like you knew this was going to happen, because now it's like we went from a thing like, oh yeah, they're taking, online teachers are taking away the livelihoods of live one-on-one teachers. But that argument kind of stopped,
Man, I find it interesting, the online thing, because you do gain a lot. You get access. You can get the information in small bits. You can rewind it, because sometimes when you're taking a real lesson, you're like, damn, I didn't really get that, but you can't rewind it. But I think one thing you do miss, and you can tell me how you deal with this in online lessons, is that personal connection and that mentorship. People don't really get to know you, and you don't really get to become their friends in a certain sense.
Yeah, then that's interesting. I would say it becomes very one-sided. Whereas I think because I put so much video content out, when I meet people that have been watching my videos, they feel like they know me, and they know a lot about, they probably know more about me than a lot of people I know in real life. You know what I mean? Like if somebody were to watch or listen to this podcast, they would have learned so much about me that, some of my friends might not even know, you know what I mean? Because I don't talk about these things with them all the time. So I think some people really, and people that I watch a lot of their content, I think I get the feeling I really know them. And then if I were to meet that person, they're not going to recognize me. This makes me think of something. And this is a lesson I learned. Do you guys know who Gary Vaynerchuk is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Gary V. Okay, you should, especially if you're doing any sort of, okay. So I think it was last year, I was doing a gig here, because, near Nice is Cannes, the city, and they do the Cannes Film Festival. And the other big thing they do there is the Lions Club conference. And I was doing a party at some big villa, jazz trio thing for some fancy party at a big villa on a hill with the infinity pool and, like one of those sort of deals. And I'm there, and I see Gary V at the party as a guest. And I'm like, the other guys, man, like, it's Gary V. And I'm like, who? It's Gary V. They have no idea. I'm like, it's Gary V. So I go up to him at some point, I go, I get my glasses, I'll run a break and get my glass of champagne. I'm like, I'm just going to pretend for a minute I'm a guest. Go up to Gary V. And I'm like, hey, man,
And he's like, "Hey, man, how's it going?" Puts his arm around me, and like he knew me, like we grew up together. He looks at me. And that right there, I was like, whoa, that's heavy. He looked at me because he gets this 50 times, 100 times a day, probably, right? And his reaction, he knows that I watched him. He knows that I know him. So when someone comes up to him, he's like, yeah, gives them that as though, and what I was doing before, like when I would first go to the conferences and people would recognize me and they'd say, Jay, hey, Jay. And I had no idea who these people are, So I'd be like, oh, who's that? So I learned from Gary, like, you know what? Like when people are watching you, that's the way you want to, when someone says your name, comes up to you, I learned like, wow, I don't know them, but they know me. And it just kind of changed the way I interact in those situations. So so to answer your question, yeah, I think they do kind of get to know you. I don't get to know them, unfortunately, so well. But I think they do know me pretty well.
That's a beautiful story. I really love that. And it's funny. I guess as you're telling that, I'm like reflecting on experiences when I've had the opportunity to meet someone that I've grown up watching or admiring, and I feel like the story goes one of two ways. It's like, hey, it's so nice to see you, and I feel welcome and so thrilled to have had the opportunity to meet this person, or very let down because the person is not trying to mess with me.
Yeah.
And I always try to be respectful of that, but of people's time and things like that. But do you feel like a sense of responsibility, kind of like what Darian was saying earlier about like with the audience and things like that? How do you view your responsibility in the way you present yourself to your community and to your viewers? And do you feel that, again, like you're providing so much information to them, you're essentially their access point to saxophone, to the world of music education, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I definitely feel a lot of responsibility to get things right, when I'm giving information. And also, it's because there's so many sources of information, teachers or books or whatever. I think I've always tried to encourage people to keep an open mind, because we get into this thing, especially with like, it seems nowadays more than ever, where information is put out there and people deal with things in absolutes. And, with like music and with a lot of things, there's multiple viewpoints, multiple perspectives that are valid. So I just present my perspective, the way I look at things, and even the way I look at things in music evolves throughout my life. And it's like that for all of us. So I think everyone just kind of needs to keep that open mind, be open to, and the way I see something or the way I hear something might be completely different than the way someone else does. And that's okay. And that's actually part of the process. And that's something I didn't always get when I was learning music. It was almost, I often, not all the time, but I often felt like I got this message, like, this is the way this is done. And then you'd go and then you'd take another class or another teacher or whatever, and they'd be like, this is the way this is done. Like, wow, that's very different than the other way. And the more different people you study with, you might get that like 5, 6 different ways. And then you're kind of put in this position where like, oh, I have to choose who's right and who's wrong. And I think if everyone just said, this is the way I do it, and someone else might do it differently, and that's totally valid too. The more different perspectives you get, and then you can make a combination of those or go in your own direction. It's all okay. So I think that's an important thing that I had kind of missing. And I want to tell people, like, listen, you might hear something different from another teacher. That doesn't mean they're wrong or I'm wrong. It just means we all look at things differently, and that's good.
Yeah, that's a good point, man. It's kind of like, it's like making gumbo. When I make my gumbo, it tastes better. It tastes better than Greg gumbo, but they don't make his gumbo bad,
No, but that's actually incorrect, man. Because my gumbo will always be better than yours.
Listen, Jay, man, I'm curious, man, because you're a great storyteller, man. I'm noticing that as this conversation goes along. And were you cognizant of that? Like when you're teaching and when you're creating your videos, are you like, all right, I need to make this a story so I can bring the people in?
That's something I've heard a lot. I mean, that's something that people have been telling me my whole life. So in that sense, I'm aware that some people think I tell good stories. I like telling stories. That's why I told you in the beginning, once you get me going, you have to tell me the time's up, I actually, another source for me of, I used to do this thing. I used to work for this, environmental, advocacy group, where we would, it was like a political thing. And I used to have to motivate a bunch of volunteers on a daily basis to go like save the world and stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess I got chosen to do that. I was good at kind of talking to people. So, and I got a lot of practice, I got a lot of practice while doing that job. So
I have one more serious question. And then I feel like we should just like ask funny questions and really get to know you here. But maybe like coming up, it seems like you have a growth mentality. And again, if there's something that you're not able to do, you have the ability and the mindset to learn it. And I was wondering, maybe throughout your years, reflecting back, what is the one thing that maybe you had to teach yourself that didn't come naturally to you that has benefited you the most in your life? For me, a lot of times I feel like it's like trying to be social. I'm very introverted, and I always have to really force myself to go out there and interact with people. And so that's a skill I'm trying to learn. And I was wondering if there's anything in your world that has changed you.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't really nail down one specific thing. I don't feel like, I guess some things come naturally to me, but I do feel like everything is a work in progress, so it's hard for me to even, everything is a work in progress really. And everything can be improved upon. I'm not like a perfectionist. I don't think of myself as a perfectionist. If you look, like my desk is always a mess, I'm kind of irregular about, when I feel like I work too hard, I just stop, and I say, okay, today I'm not going to do anything, and I try to just keep balance and stuff. Yeah, I find it hard to answer that question, Greg.
Man, I'll ask you one more serious one, and then Greg can ask all his funny questions. But what would you say is your biggest failure in your career or in life? And how did you learn from it and to turn that into something positive for yourself?
You know what? That's another hard one for me because we often think about that. We often think about regrets. I don't know if it. I'm actually, I think very happy, and it's one of these things. Like I as I kind of went through my life, I was like, I want to be a musician at some point, and then I kind of made that happen. I never thought of myself as a great musician, but I made a career out of it, and that was cool, and it was like I checked off that goal, always work in progress, right? And then I was at some point, I was like, I want to live in Europe, and I just did it. I just left. I had a whole life, with jobs and work and bands and students and everything. I just said, one day I was like, you know what, bye. And I went and I moved to the south of France, and that was it. And I made that work. And then I was like, I need to learn how to speak French, and I did that. And then, so throughout my life, I kind of always had a short list of goals, and one by one, they kind of get checked off. And that always brings me a lot of satisfaction and pleasure and happiness. I wanted to start a family. So I've had my daughter, she's 5 years old now. That for me is wow, it's the greatest accomplishment. you know,
Absolutely.
and there's a whole list of new mini goals that come along with that. So I just kind of go through and I look at every failure or any, you know, as temporary. You know, anything along the way was temporary, and it was actually part of achieving the goal that I eventually achieved. So I don't even, you know, and sometimes it doesn't feel that way at the time, but later on, you know, I was like, yeah, well, if I didn't do that, you know, all these pieces wouldn't have fallen into place for this to happen. So I think I just look at it that way. And so I can't answer your question either.
You answered it. You answered it. You
No,
answered
that was a great answer.
That was a great answer, man. Thank you.
So where do you see yourself like moving forward in the future now? Like, you know, again, you in the next five years, where does Jay head, and where do you see Better Sax going?
Yeah, that's a good question because, you know, this was like, if I had a goal set out to become like the #1 saxophone YouTuber, I don't know, I'm not saying that I am that at all, but like I've far exceeded any expectation I ever had in the beginning. So I was like, this is like all bonus. Everything that's going on for me right now is complete bonus. The popularity of the website and the courses and the YouTube and all that, it's a bonus. It's still like I'll record something and play, like make an Instagram video, and I get all these people watching and liking it and everything. I'm like, wow, that's crazy. You know, I have no expectation. So it's all bonus. I just want to, you know, for now, I think of it as just, I just want to keep continuing doing the content because I'm enjoying it. And I just want to keep going in that direction until things change. I'm expecting things to change as far as, you know, YouTube is what it is today, but it's constantly evolving. So I'm thinking about in terms of like, well, I just want to, you know, I think the whole world is going to be changing as a result of this thing. And so I just kind of want to stay on top of it and change with things as they evolve. And, you know, part of the thing that's important to me is like almost taking the saxophone world and the music world in a lot of ways is behind when it comes to technology. And so part of me is like helping more people kind of access the present and the future, you know, and take them out of the old way of thinking about things, which a lot of it I disagree with, you know.
Yeah, that's a really good point, man. It is very difficult. Like I always tell people, don't be Blockbuster, be Netflix. And you know, because musicians are having a really hard time right now making the transition to online. It's like, okay, we used to play in clubs, and now that's not available. So, but we can reach everyone with the camera and a microphone. Why don't we do that? Yeah.
Well, and the thing is about what musicians used to do. Even before the pandemic, a lot of that stuff just stopped working really on a level that was sustainable to have a comfortable life.
Yeah.
You know, when I moved back to New York in 2005, and I went and I did my master's degree at Queens College. And so I was in New York 5 years, working musician, studying, doing all the same things. So, and I had to work really hard. I went back to the thing was gigging, teaching, repairing instruments, you know, whatever to get by, and working 7 days a week basically. And some days, you know, you start teaching, you know, you leave your house at 7 a.m, you teach all day, then you go to a rehearsal, and then you go, you know, and it's just constant. Everybody knows like that, right? That vibe. And then having to say yes to every gig. You know, there's no like, I'm not going to do that gig. I just say yes because you have to. How are you going to pay your bills? You know, do every gig, just everything, you take it. So I did that for a long time, and that's not even available to everybody. You know, that sort of opportunity, and it's hard, and you'll never get ahead with that. You'll always be behind in that sort of lifestyle. And you'll never get the rewards, I think, that you're due for the hard work that goes into that lifestyle, you know? And I'm just basing that on, my own experience, but also all my friends and colleagues, the people that are doing really, really well. I've always been like, man, it's just to be better. They deserve more than what they get, and we're always making sacrifices in that life as a musician. And it's because everything is set up that way. It's just set up. The deck is stacked against you. The money you make for live performances just goes down, down, down over time. The money you make as a recording artist goes down, down over time. And it's just, this is a trend that's been going on for so long. And I feel like there's a lot of exploitation when it comes to musicians and artists. People expecting you to do things that in any other career, no one would ever ask you or expect out of you. It's things just crazy, so it's just a battle and a fight. So I look at this as like, wow, this is the first time in maybe history that tables are suddenly turned for a minute. And if you can kind of get on top, everybody can, there's room for everybody to participate in this too. This isn't like you got to win some sort of internet lotto you got to work hard. But if you're already working hard, as a musician to survive, you just got to redirect the energy somewhere else. And we have the opportunity to create new platform that is not, exploitative, like the record companies, like media, like all the rules that are in place are against musicians and artists. And right now, in this brief moment, like we're rewriting the rules. I have no doubt that big corporations are going to come in, and they already are, and try to, do the same thing that they've always done, so that musicians will be creating the content and they'll be making all the money again. But right at the moment, there is lots of opportunity to circumvent that.
Yeah. Look, Jay, man, we're running out of time. That was a great answer. We're running out of time here. We got a few more minutes, and we got to let you go. But are there any things you want to talk about so that people can consume, and like your website and
yeah, I mean, if you play the saxophone and you want to learn some more, go check out the YouTube channel. There's like just tons of hours of free content on there to check out. If you want to go to the next level, I got my courses, which you can find on BetterSax.com. And yeah, and then my Instagram account where I just post more like fun stuff and just, Instagram stuff.
Yeah, that's where all the cat videos are.
Yeah.
Man, Jay, I have to say thank you so very, very much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences and opinions with us this morning/afternoon. And also outside of this, I really appreciate the work you've been doing with YouTube and again providing educational, like high quality educational content for people all over the world. And I know, as someone who has consumed your content, and I have many of my students who've checked you out, and I know you're really positively impacting a lot of people in the world, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for doing that and spending your afternoon with us today.
It's my great pleasure. Thank you both for having me.
Thank you. This is the Working Artist Project. My name is Darian Douglas.
And my name is Gregory Ajid. Jay, thank you very much.
We'll catch y'all later.
See you guys.
Peace.